Posing seems to be one of the areas that portrait photographers really struggle with. It seems almost elusive, like it's part of a dark art or some sort of secret. Like there's some special skill or hidden talent to unlocking it. And if you get it wrong, you can end up with a shoot that just looks really awkward and forced and nothing's really connecting. And no one's going to be happy with the results of that. But if you get it right, you end up with a really dynamic looking shoot that looks really interesting to the viewer with lots of different poses and lots of stuff going on. And in this video, I'm going to show you the system that I use. And it's a really simple system that I think anyone can do. Because whilst demonstrating the pose you want works for certain types of people, if you're built like me, that's just not an option. And some people are also not going to be confident enough to do that kind of thing. So we have to find a way to explain what we want, but we also need a method, a formula that works with everyone that we can just get into and repeat over and over again. So that's what I'm going to be sharing with you in this video. Let's get started. So the method that I developed over time was to work from some base positions. So I have some starting points and then a whole bunch of variations. So let's do that. So the first starting position that I always work from, and we can see this is like a category that I want to exhaust, if you like. And that is going to be the front on pose. So I want them to stay pretty much in a position where they're squared off towards the camera. And the reason that I work in this way, in this method, is that I want to limit and create some boundaries and some barriers as to what we're actually doing, some confines to it. Because once we have some confines, we can get more variety out of that one thing and then move on to another sort of basic starting pose. So straight on gives me all of these variations. I think it's one of the mistakes I see a lot of photographers do is that they only think of standing poses. I think if you're a portrait photographer, you must include, well, you don't have to, but you should include seated poses as well. So get a stool or a chair or something for people to sit on because it makes the world of difference. And I'd actually recommend that you start off with the seated poses at the start of the shoot because it's by far the easiest to do. So as you can see from some of the pictures I'm going to show you here, you can have leaning forward, looking at the camera, you know, feeling thoughtful. Then you can get them to lean back a bit. Maybe you get something that's really symmetrical like this picture. Then we can do some standing poses. And what we wanted to do is just let them flow a little bit, but keeping them straight towards us. So we can go for some different arm positions and we can get them to lift one arm up, bring one arm down, bring their arms back a little bit. And then I might start easing things up slightly and say, now turn your head off to the side. And then we get a shot like this. So then we start getting some variation. So the body is still squared off, it's front onto us essentially, but now we're getting a little bit of variation. And what I want the model to do is think about different ways that they can move their arms slightly, but staying pretty much squared off facing me. And then that gives me and gives my subject that confined restriction, if you like, in which to operate. And that makes people more creative. It's much like when you, as a photographer, say, I'm just going to use one lens today. So for a subject, this is like doing the same thing for that. So they find variations and you find variations within that one position. We can say that looking straight at the camera, we have these different looks that we're trying to hit. And then we're going to have some improvisation on the day and see what we come up with and don't overcomplicate it. And I think the key is to let your subject keep moving and not to be too static. Because if you have to explain the pose, it's a bit like when you have to tell someone a joke and then explain the joke, it becomes really difficult. There are some people that are really good at doing that, but I think the vast majority of photographers are not so great at that. And this keeping the person moving works much better. Then the next position that I like to move on to is a side on pose. And again, this can be seated or standing. And we get so much variation. And one of the things that changes when we move to the side on position, we can get them seated and then bring their legs off to the side, up, down, whatever different positions and variations on that as well. It just injects another level of change and shape because we're seeing the person's body from a completely different angle. So we want to essentially keep them side on to us. And then let their arms and head and stuff move around and their leg positions as well, particularly if they're seated. That's going to give us all of that variety that we're after. And again, find online poses that you like and then you can sort of edge them towards that. When they're close to hitting one of those poses, you might say, oh, leg up slightly, something like that will get them into that position. So what I see photographers get wrong mostly is that their poses are pretty much straight onto camera, or there's a slight twist of the hip, and that's kind of the entire shoot is like that all the way through. And so to break that up, that kind of feeling, the side-on position is really effective for that. But the next one that I'm going to show you, the third position that I like to use with my subjects, is with their back slightly turned to the camera. So what we're not trying to do here is we're not trying to get them so their back is facing the camera. We're working from that side position and then getting them to just turn a little bit further than that. So it's like the back of the shoulder is then showing towards the camera. Now, this is slightly more limited for the poses that you can do. You can have, I'll show you some variations that you can do on the screen now with your subjects. You can have sort of arm slightly down, arm pulled back a little bit more, but you can get your model to turn and swish around into this position. So you can get hair movement and things as well. It can look much more dynamic. And if you get them to swing around into this position and just hit different positions naturally, it will come to them and it will come to you as well. And you'll get that variation that you're looking for. But this position of their shoulder sort of facing towards the camera, the back of the shoulder facing towards the camera, it gives you a really interesting variation again, and it makes a very good pose position as a starting point for your subject that's going to break up the repetition of the other looks that you've got. It's going to give you that sort of dynamic portfolio and series of pictures that you get. And I think if you look over the pictures that I'm showing you in this video, you can now see how my work's put together, right? And that's why I say have this visual repertoire of like, these are the three main categories that I use for posing. And then in my mind, I have like sort of 7 or 8 poses for each one. That gives you enough for a photo shoot because you're going to get all of the little variations of their movements around them as well. So don't overcomplicate it. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just learn that and then sort of try and apply that. And you'll get there really quickly, because you just need to have it in your mind that you can do it, and then it will start to come together. Now, the other thing that you'll need to do with your photos in order to get them to look like this is you're going to have to edit them properly. And if you want to learn how I edit my pictures my way, not generic editing, how to get my look, then please look at the links in the description and check out my online portrait editing workshop, where I show you how I edit my pictures from start to finish. I explain all the processes to you so you can take it on board and apply it to your images as well. The links are in the description down below. One thing that I think makes shoots really difficult is if you expect your model to constantly hold static poses. Holding static poses means that it gets really complicated to come up with variety. I want my model, and I explain this to them before the shoot and at the shoot, that I don't want them to sort of feel like they're coming from like a stop, then move, then stop, then move. Because that's not how we move as people. We don't act like that. We're not people that freeze and then move and freeze and then move and freeze. So what I want my subject to do is kind of slow down, speed up. So if it's me, then I might be like this, look off to the side, look back, move again. And I'm not quite stopping ever. It just keeps going all the time. And this creates variety. And I can direct, which we'll come on to in a bit, but also my subject can improvise. It needs to be the ability for both of you to improvise on the spot. So I can say, oh, go slightly this way. And then I want them to carry on from that and keep going. And I want them to feel what feels natural in the next movement. But I will have some ideas that I want to go to, because we're going to have a visual repertoire in our minds of the type of shots that we want to create. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up, because it really helps me out. It's something you can do for me if you find this information useful. And also drop me a comment as well. Did you find this useful? Do you have any more questions? Would you like me to go into more depth than this? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys again in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.